Good morning, everyone. Today I have something to confess. Today I caught the bus in instead of driving, and I have a lot of respect for any of you that caught public transport in here to get here by 8 o'clock this morning. Okay, I've accidentally closed it. I'll come back to this in the break, but some of you might have seen on the Facebook page that I posted a link that was done by Vote Compass on the marriage equality debate that's happening here in Australia and the postal vote that was sent out. I'll come back to it in the break because it's a great example of something that, that it illustrates where we're heading with this course, in that this first half of the course we've been talking about particular methods and how to go about things in terms of research methods, but the name of the course is Applied Research Methods. So now we're heading into a new phase where we're going to talk about decision making. We'll get to discuss some of the professional context that you might be working within, and we'll talk about how you can use research to inform decision making in your work. It's a very hot topic at the moment, especially when we talk about political public decision making, because there seems to be at the moment the idea that everything is like a reality TV show and everyone will just, everyone's an expert and everyone will just decide what's going to happen based on feelings, maybe more than evidence. So today is about shifting into that new mode. We're going to talk about decision making, goals and objectives, performance criteria, and then we're going to touch on multi-criteria analysis. And then over the next few weeks, after the break, we'll look at a few other ways that we can feed research into the decision-making processes in management and planning in particular. And this is a critical thing to look at, because we no longer live in a world where experts can say we scientifically know the one best way to do things. Most of the problems we're trying to tackle are complex. They involve multiple stakeholders, multiple interests, multiple areas of expertise. And lucky planners and managers, part of your job would be to try and integrate or at least bring those people together around the table and facilitate them to integrate some of that diversity and make a practical decision. I think I said at the start of our semester, it's one of the things that I love about planning and management is that we can analyse the best way to do things theoretically. We can philosophize about how things should be, but in the end planners and managers have to try and make a pragmatic decision based on the best information that we have at the moment. Won't necessarily win you friends. In fact, if you're doing your job properly, you probably, if everyone likes you, you might not be doing your job properly in terms of all the stakeholders. Okay, so the aim of today, there's going to be two parts. We're going to look at goals, objectives and performance criteria, how to write them, and we'll talk a little bit about how research might feed into these as well. And then we're going to look at multi-criteria analysis. I want you to be able to understand broadly the different types of decision criteria, then some of the different decision rules that we can use to bring those criteria together, and I'll get you to reflect on a simple example. If we have time at the end, the other thing I would like to do is to give you the chance for people, more informally, for people to touch base with me afterwards and let me know which parts of the earlier weeks of this course you particularly want me to revisit in little cameos over the next few weeks. Because the idea of this course is we did throw, especially quantitative, a lot of stuff at you in the first 4 weeks. And now we want to keep revisiting that and embedding that in a practical manner. Okay, so goals, objectives and performance criteria. Now you're going to come across a whole range of terminology. For some of you, this will be familiar. Even if it is familiar, it's good to check your understanding of these things, because what we often find out in the workplace is some of these different terms get used interchangeably when perhaps they shouldn't be. Sometimes that, in a practical sense, that doesn't affect decision making. However, sometimes it leaves decision making very fuzzy and up in the air and not really guided. Towards the end of your illustrious career, you might be in the position to be able to change that and reform that. At the start of your careers, you're going to need to pick up where things are a bit fuzzy and ask for clarification. That will help you to be strategic in your work. So we're going to talk about a couple of the most important ones of these here. Now, if people, quick show of hands, have people seen diagrams like this before with mission, goal, objective dropping down one after the other? A couple of you? Okay. So this will be good too. So this is, I guess, a rational approach. It can be applied at the organisational level. You can also see it applied to particular plans, planning schemes, management plans, etc. And the idea of it is that you have, like a lot of these nested hierarchies, you have a very broad, all-encompassing high-level statement at the top. In this case, it's called a mission, but we also have vision and values sitting in there. Then under that, we have goals. Then under that, we have objectives. And you can see there that all of those help to feed down and guide the activities that we're going to invest our resources into. We're going to get an actual outcome. If we're really lucky, we've got some resources set aside to evaluate our outcome. And we're going to need performance criteria in order to do that. It all sounds pretty straightforward. You'd be amazed how often these things get sketched up on the run, or they just remain informal. So we'll also talk about why it's so difficult to put things like good goals and objectives into action in the workplace. Now, I've got these links here for you to have a look at a later date. These are just some examples of some different companies and their missions, visions and values. It's good to have a look at that and then think about what the purpose of these things might be. Actually, I'm online. This is my favourite one, if the link works. So this is for Domino's Pizza. UQ does not endorse or support Domino's Pizza in any way. Okay, here's their mission. Hang on. Oh yeah, here it is. Sell more pizza and have more fun. Okay, so that's a very big, broad, just kind of fluffy idea there. What do you think of that as a sort of mission for your organisation? Assuming, does anyone here work in a pizza company? Okay, good. You can see there you've got vision, mission, values. I'll get you to have a quick chat to the person next to you now. What do you think about that in terms of a vision and a mission and how that might be used to guide decision making in this organisation? Okay? A couple of minutes to talk to the person next to you. So perhaps imagine that you're a new employee in this company and you've come along to your orientation and they're training you and giving you a bit of a picture about your new workplace. What do you think when you look at that? What sort of workplace are you coming into? Okay, any thoughts on this? What sort of workplace do you think this is how, in terms of guiding decision making, what sort of hints do you get from the vision, mission, values here? Any ideas? To me, when I look at that, you see this vision. It's got a very strong sort of competitive thing there. You can see that often these qualities aren't defined very clearly at the vision level. So really, all that's saying is we're a business that's about pizza. We're going to sell it to people, and we're going to try to be the best at it. You can see in terms of the mission, they've tried to keep it a bit light-hearted. That might tell you something about who they're employing. So you'll have a lot of young people, perhaps casual workers, and so they want to keep people along for the ride, but they're trying to say, hey, it's not just all about work. The reality, I'm not sure how much fun it is. I know people who've worked in pizza places before. It's a lot of hard work. But then once you come down to the values, you can see perhaps a bit more instruction there in terms of how decisions might be guided. Treat people as you'd like to be treated. So there you've got something that can be used in terms of teamwork amongst employees, in terms of customer relations. Produce the best for less. You've got an emphasis there on efficiency. And then as you head down there, you've got more of that competition, being ambitious, etc. And so you can do that with a range of different companies. There's some more serious ones there in terms of health. So you can look at the Royal Brisbane Hospital, and you can see what their vision is. When you come down, in terms of Brisbane City Council, and this is very true of government in general, I could only find values in one place. Does anyone know why that might be? Compared to a company, why when you come to a government, you might be able to find some values, but not a specific mission or vision in one place. So again, this has to do with the focus of the organisation. So whereas Domino's can very succinctly say, well, this is what we do, it's pizza. Once we're talking about government, we've got a diversity of functions and interests. It's more of, it's where people live rather than primarily where people work, although there are lots of employees there. And so what you often find there under government, there might be values, what's going to be used to frame decision making. But then in terms of vision, you'll have to go to specific departments. So every planning scheme will have some sort of vision attached to it for the future. Most departments might have an internal sort of vision, and that should be integrated under the values in some way. So as we go along, I'm going to show how this then ties back into research, but this would be the broad framework that you might be working within. I've also got a link there for UQ's one. You can have a look there at the mission statement for your chosen university and think about how that might frame the institution here. So in the end, what the mission, vision and values are trying to do is it's a reminder. It's a reminder of why the organisation exists and its reason for being. It seems like you wouldn't have to do it, but you actually do. Because in the cut and thrust of planning, of limited resources, it's very easy for organisations to lose sight of why they exist in the first place. And there's always a battle as well between simple survival of an organisation and achieving its purpose. And that's always held in tension. So part of what mission, vision and values do is it puts a bit of a framework around that, hopefully to stop an organisation drifting too far from why it actually exists. That second function there as well, so it's a motivator, it's a high level sort of motivator for all employees to just get some sort of big picture idea of what they're part of and where it's heading. So sitting underneath that, you then have more specific goals, and then underneath that again, more specific objectives. Let's talk a little bit about goals. Sometimes people use goals and objectives interchangeably. I'm going to talk about why that's not the best approach. So basically, a goal is defining what you want to achieve in the future, and it should be broad, describing general outcomes, so broad and unspecific. I guess more specific than the vision, the mission, the vision, but it's about general outcomes as that you might hope to see as you approach that mission and vision. And then it's only once you get to objectives that you start to see something specific and measurable, and to do that you're going to need performance criteria. The most important thing though is that the goals should be derived from the mission, vision and values, and so it involves a process of saying, well, what do we need to do in order to be heading directly down the runway for our mission and staying true to our values while we do it. So goals cover long periods of time. You do see some frameworks where they will say a goal is exactly this period of time, but often goals can be unspecified in terms of their time limits because we're keeping them large and unspecified. The most important thing, and it's really tempting to do this, is that goals shouldn't predetermine the detail of program activities. Okay? The reason why it's tempting to do this is organisations usually don't begin with a full developed set of goals. They begin in a more organic way, and then as they grow they start to try and set clearer goals. It's very tempting to deliberately set a goal to back up your current activities, but what's really needed here is to step back and say, well, what are our broad goals to achieve our mission before we get sucked into saying, well, what do we actually have to do? So it needs to be outcome oriented, and so it's a desired outcome that we're going to try and achieve. So, for example, a focus on biodiversity protection rather than jumping to saying we're an organisation that creates parks. Okay? Is everyone following that? I'm going to get you to do this in a minute. And these are usually set at the top, but particularly in large organisations. Although there are sort of collaborative ways of doing it with the mission and the vision, with the rest of the staff as well. But in terms of your work, as when you leave this place, you'll probably, those goals will be set above you, and it will provide the framework that you're working within. I want to talk about an example that I find really interesting, because when you think about where planners and managers sit, particularly if we talk about government, they're not likely to sit at the top of the hierarchy. Perhaps if you're the top of the planning department, you will have quite a lot of sway, but these goals are providing a framework generally for what planners and managers do, and the sorts of projects that you're interested in and the business case that you want to put together to do it needs to align with those goals. And the example that I want to show is something that happened here in Brisbane, where environmental planners were able to use goals that had been set, in this case by politicians and a little bit with the public, to put a business case together for particular programs and activities. So that's part of why, even though you're not running the show, not yet anyway, I want you to think about how goals and objectives are really important for your work. These days, I guess we're looking more and more in terms of research about how do organisations become nimble and strategic and resilient, and this is one of the ways to do it. In the future, when we have, if some of the predictions about the future come to pass, we're going to have more limited resources, we're going to have to get smarter about how we achieve sustainability goals. And if you're working in that context, you're going to have to be smarter about how do you align the programs that you're trying to achieve and the goals in terms of your position with the high-level goals of the organisation. Unless you're working for an organisation like a planning consultancy that is exactly focused on planning, or an environmental consultancy, if you're working within a bigger framework, you're going to have to be able to do that in a strategic way. So underneath the goals is where we start to get objectives. They're usually thought of as, you know, not too hard to whip up, but they're actually harder to do than goals. I guess they're seen as easier because now we're starting to talk about measurable outcomes. Again, the temptation is to leap to particular activities that we're going to do, but you need to hold yourself back from that. Again, just as the goals are derived from the mission and the vision, the objectives are derived from the goals. And basically what we're saying is, what do we need to do, or what needs to be achieved, to be able to say that we have achieved the goal above it. So every objective should sit within a goal above it and contribute towards it. In terms of how this then starts to look a little bit like a research project or applied research project, where in a research project you'll have your research question and then you'll have your objectives, and your research objectives, once you've done them, you're meant to be able to answer your research question. So in this case we're talking about planning and management decisions, but again you've got a goal, and once you've achieved your objectives you should be able to say that you're achieving your goal. And now that we're getting more specific, we have to start to think about unintended or negative effects. By the way, I know I apologise that the slides aren't up. They'll go up straight after the lecture today. So you don't have to write absolutely everything down. Now, one of the things that should interest you about this is that, especially in more innovative organisations, more staff will be involved in the setting of objectives. This might help you choose who you want to work for, actually, because it's the mark of a good organisation, I think, that unless you have management that knows exactly what the workers below them are dealing with, and in a big organisation that's very rarely the case, because the pressures that are on managers are very different to the people that are implementing programs, you would hope that those managers would work in collaboration with the people who are implementing programs to set some of these objectives. And so that's what best practice says that you should see. Now, I'll just put this slide in as a bit of a summary so that you can compare goals and objectives. It's a question that we sometimes like to ask on the exam, and in practice, when you go into the workplace, you'll see that the two are sometimes confused. So you can see that similarly, they're both outcome oriented, they need to be very clear in their terminology, however, they're broad in their reach. The difference, though, as you go down there, is that the goal is not measurable in quantitative terms, but the objectives are measurable in quantitative terms, and we'll go into the details of that in just a minute. The goals are partially operational in that they will guide the more specific operations. They will guide the more specific operations of an organisation to some extent, but it's the objectives that will very specifically and entirely start to guide the operations. Again, you have here, well, in this slide I'm saying that the time period is unspecified. It's at least sort of 5+ years. Whereas an objective, you want to know by when are you trying to achieve that. Down here, broad purposes, specific aims. So it's an attempt to bring more rational decision making, hopefully evidence-based decision making, from something very broad and visionary and to link that in under this broad vision. I find it really interesting because every organisation is operating in a stressed, politicised, often resource-constrained environment. We like to think we're a rational species. Personally, I don't think we are anywhere near as rational as we think we are. But what we do is we try to put structures in place to put as much rationality into that situation as we can. If we're talking about government, whether the politicians then override all of this or not is another matter and probably a different course to this one. Okay. This isn't letting me go on. Well, this is... Okay, so within those objectives, how are we going to know whether we're achieving what we're setting out to achieve? And so obviously we need some sort of way of measuring performance criteria. Now, every time I say evidence-based or measuring, in your mind, hopefully you're not getting flashbacks to the first 5-8 weeks of this course, but in your mind, you now have a range of ways to do measurement, to collect evidence, to analyse it. Most of you will have backgrounds in other courses or in other workplaces where you have another set of experiences around how to gather evidence and measure it and analyse it. And so I want you to be, I guess my goal here is for you to integrate the first half of semester and your prior experiences into this material that we're going through. So now that we're talking about performance criteria, we then have to talk about specific performance targets. By this stage, we're going through a process a little bit like I talked about at the start of semester, where we're operationalising some sort of concept. Okay, so the example before of just say we're talking about national parks, Queensland Parks and Wildlife Services, and perhaps one of their goals is to conserve biodiversity. And conserving biodiversity, once they start to set objectives under that, they're going to have to operationalise that concept of biodiversity conservation. Well, what does that actually mean to conserve biodiversity? What are particular performance targets that we would be expecting to meet, and how could we measure them? And can we measure them in an efficient and transparent and accurate way? And then all of that would be a component of the objectives that they then start to set. The objectives should be verifiable by outside sources for a whole range of reasons. You're accountable for the particular resources that you're investing into these activities, whether you're public, corporate, or private or community. So it needs to be transparent. And then in terms of scientific process, if we're talking about trying to wrench a sort of mostly non-rational species into a more rational way of making decisions, we need to show that we're following some sort of transparent, evidence-based process and that we're accountable to that. Or at least if we're going to depart from that, it's hopefully an above-board, conscious decision to do that. Ideally, it shouldn't just be a yes or no. Have you hit the target, yes or no? Again, this is we don't always achieve exactly what we want. We need to know how close did we get to our target. And so you want to set up a performance criteria that in terms of the type of variable that you're choosing, it goes beyond nominal. Okay, at least needs to be an ordinal variable. And this is just smart as well. You're wanting major actors involved in the program to agree with it. You can set the best objectives in the world, but if you haven't got buy-in from major stakeholders, at least internally to your organisation, probably externally as well to a certain degree, you're just not going to achieve what you want to achieve. So this is where some of what we're talking about here crosses over with some of the other courses you might be doing, where you're trying to work with other stakeholders and bring them together around decision making. Can I have a show of hands so I know how much to talk about on this? People, who's seen this term, SMART objectives? Okay, I'll go into a little bit of detail on it. So there's this acronym, you'll see it thrown around. Some of the letters are stand for slightly different things sometimes. There's a lot of good information online about it. But this is a bit of a formula for how you can write a good objective. Good meaning that you're able to use it to guide and measure decision making. So first of all, and this is very obvious, it needs to be specific. It needs to have clearly intended outcomes. It needs to be measurable, and we were just talking about that in terms of performance criteria, so that then we can use it for our monitoring and evaluation programs, and we can see whether we're hitting the goal that we're aiming for. When you have to write up your project report, you can show that you were responsible with the funds, you were constructive with the program. It needs to be achievable. It's very tempting to set very ambitious objectives, but they need to be practical. You're better off setting slightly conservative objectives and showing that you're reliable with your work, that you can achieve what you say you're going to achieve. So you need to make sure you have necessary time, skill, resources and authorities. Now, I need to, I guess, clarify this just a little bit, which is that in nimble, innovative organisations, sometimes you take a slight risk with achievability. So perhaps you can't nail down everything exactly before you put your proposal out there for what this particular program is, but you're weighing up, is there some way for us to access the skills and resources that we need to do this? And if you think that you've got a pretty good chance of doing that, and you're in that sort of nimble, innovative space, I would say just go for it. But don't quote me on that if it doesn't pan out for you later on. Okay, it needs to be relevant, obviously, so you need to be able to clearly show how your objective fits under the goal that it sits within and how it's contributing towards that goal. It needs to be time-based, so by when are you trying to achieve it? Probably have some milestones along the way as well. Yes, that's it, that's SMART. So, you know, acronyms were much trendier a few years ago, and this is when this emerged, but it's a good way to sort of measure that. Does anyone have any comments on that so far? No? Good. Okay, so after all of that is done, now we start to talk about actions or activities. And again, we're going through the same process. It needs to be linked to specific objectives. It's going to be more specific than the objectives, and this time we're talking about the process. So who's going to do it, what, when, how. Again, feasibility needs to be appropriate, and now we're talking about what sort of programs are we going to put into place. A lot of this sort of thinking came out of the corporate world, of organisational management theory, but it's now been taken up into most large organisations, whatever sector they're in, and governments as well. And particular governments do this more strongly than others. I would say that Brisbane City Council is an example of a government that's very strongly focused, at least in writing, on this way of doing things. Okay, I'm going to jump to this one now. How are we going for time? Okay, good. We've got time to look at an example now, and then I'll get you to have a go at jotting down something as well. But first of all, we're going to, all the principles I was talking about now, let's have a look at some objectives from two government departments in Sarawak. And this is from a couple of years ago, actually. I need to say that it's been updated since then. And I guess I'm using this as an example of where a mission, goals, objectives may not be set in a way that can specifically guide decision making. So have a look at that. I'd like you to just spend a minute or so skimming through that and reflecting on how well the mission and the objectives fit the principles I was just talking about, and where you think things might be, where it's good and where things might be weak and may need improving. Okay? So you can just reflect to yourself, jot down a few ideas. Okay. Any comments on the mission there? What do you reckon? Pretty good, pretty clear? If you were an employee in this forest department, do you feel like it gives you a broad context? Remember, the two values, the two ideas is to frame what you're doing in terms of a big mission, and also to try and incentivise. I guess I think the mission's fairly good here, actually. So it very clearly sort of talks about sustainably managing and developing the forest resources. So it's sort of defined which areas they're responsible for. And then here, you know, you could argue that this is extra detail that's not needed. However, this is a way to incentivise as well. If you're tapping into concepts of nation, of contributing to a greater cause, that's one of the functions of a mission. So I don't mind that mission. I think it's quite good. What about the objectives? Is there anything there that you would change based on the idea of objectives that I went through before? Yep. It's quite broad, yep. Can you just say that again?
I was saying that, for example, that objective is
Yep.
how do we do it?
Yeah, so it's not really a SMART objective, is it? There's nothing there that's measurable. It's probably achievable, but we don't know because it's not measurable. We won't know if we're heading towards it. There's no, what else is missing in there? Time, yeah, that's what I almost gave away to you. So I would actually say, if you look at that they're actually goals rather than objectives. Now you could argue it's semantics. However, if there's not something more specific sitting under those objectives, then it's going to be difficult to guide decisions. Now this happens very regularly in organisations where you don't see clear performance criteria and time within objectives. I would say that they were just using this interchangeably as goals here, but the researcher that had a look at this couldn't see any clear sort of SMART objectives sitting under these broad ones. Let's look at some sample objectives from a different land and survey department there. Here we've got a mission of to manage land to the best advantage of the state in accordance with the concept of politics of development. So this is going to be sort of a government document and principles, values, I guess, by which decisions are being made. So here we've got some sample objectives here: to administer land within the existing political, social, legal, economic framework so that it would be best put to its most profitable and efficient use. Is that a SMART objective? No, I would say it's got a little more detail than before, but it's still, we can't see a time limit there. It's probably a little bit too broad. I guess there's there's a bit more detail in there around which we might be able to improve this so that it can guide decision making in an evidence-based way. Let's look at one of those. So we're going to reframe these objectives as goals and say we'll treat it as a goal. So here's one of those objectives, and now we're framing it as a goal. To speed up the issue of mining leases and prospecting licences so the state's mineral resources can be fully exploited to benefit the people and the state. Now, as I was saying there, let's relabel it as a goal so it's sort of sitting higher up. And then when we do that, we can say that this section here, so that the state's mineral resources can be fully exploited to benefit the people and the state, that's unnecessary, so we're going to get rid of it. Do you think we just delete it completely? Is there anywhere else we can put it when you read that? What I would recommend is that if it's not listed anywhere else, what we're actually talking about here are values. And so we can move that into a document that talks about our values and how our values more broadly frame what we're doing. So that if we do that, we make the goal nice and specific and clear, and we also start to bring our values together in a way that's going to be more useful for guiding decision making at that higher level. Often values are sort of distributed, they're semi-articulated or not articulated, and they're scattered across an organisation. And so then we're going to set some objectives under that. I've given you these particular ones, and I guess what's important to say here is that often goals will have a number of objectives, not just one objective under it. And so here we're saying objective, we're going to increase the number of mining leases issued by 10% in the fiscal year of 2004. Okay, as I was saying, these have been updated, but this was what a researcher proposed with them about how they could make more specific objectives. So you can see there, increase the number. Now, on the side there as well, you've got objective, increase the land area leased for mining by 10% in the fiscal year 2004. Now, which one of those, I want you to reflect on that. Which one of those objectives is better and why? Okay, have a quick look there. You've got one that's saying the number of mining leases, and you've got one saying we're going to increase the area leased for mining in 2004. So what you've got here is a situation where the processes have been slower than what the government and what extractive industries think that they could be, and they're looking at how do we speed it up. Let's set some more specific objectives to guide our decision making. Which one's better? Do you know the answer to most questions asked at a university that seem to be simple A or B or yes or no? Have I said that in this course? There's two ways to answer these questions usually. It's good to say, well, it depends, and then you go on to explain why it depends. Or you might say, well, it's this one, but only under these conditions. You know, so you're showing whoever's marking your work or whoever you're working for that you can analyse the situation and go a bit deeper, more sophisticated. So I would say there that depending on the particular situation, both of those might be important. You might have a number of mining leases that you might have a large number of mining leases that are queued up, but maybe a lot of them are very small and they're not actually going to really add to your GDP if that's one of your goals. So maybe if you're trying to increase efficiency, you need to have a way to prioritise, well, which ones of those mining leases are most important for investing our resources into to trying to achieve. So I would say generally that both of them would be important to use, but most of the time I think if you're talking about a situation where it has been quite inefficient and there's a big backlog, and often when objectives are first set, it's because something's obviously not working and they want to put something, you're trying to fix a particular problem, you would lean towards that second one where you're able to prioritise within particular mining leases. So this second one is perhaps a little more comprehensive because you can look at the number of them and then you can also prioritise which ones are largest. But you can see under there that you're going to have very different performance criteria of hectares versus number of mining leases, and you're going to see that the action required is going to be different as well. So there you have the action on the left, revising mineral leasing approval criteria. So perhaps there's too many criteria and we can streamline it, or increasing the minimum amount of land for lease applications. So perhaps there's some sort of change to the application process that you can do to encourage the larger leases to come to the fore and discourage small leases. So that's just one example of how you can do that, and it was used quite effectively. Again, we're thinking perhaps not sustainably here, we're thinking very specifically in terms of extractive industries and how do we improve the output from this particular department. Okay, let's look at another one. So this one's looking at the National Parks and Wildlife Division, and the objective here is to develop an effective publicity and extension service on nature conservation. Obviously, it's not an objective in terms of the SMART criteria, and we can see there that it's focused on action and not outcome. So we need to remove that, but we won't throw that in the bin. We can actually move that around to a more specific spot. So instead of moving in the previous one, we moved a section up to the values. Here we're going to move a section into the activities provisionally, but we need to go through that process to decide if that activity is actually what we need to be doing. Anyone who's an IT specialist in the break, you can tell me why that button keeps coming up. I think I need to shut Explorer. Okay, so here we have the objective that we're going to reformat to, and you can see here, increase the number of Sarawak households that visit nature reserves and national parks by 10% in 2004. So hopefully achievable, still quite ambitious, 10%, unless the number was very low. You can see that we're talking about number of households. So that's our unit of measurement if we're starting to think about research and how we might go about this. And then you can see that, that is going to be the basis of the performance criteria. So really you should see the main unit for your performance criteria stated in the objective, the number of households, increase the number of households. Ideally that's what you want. You've got your time frame and you've got the target. Okay, so then they can use that to justify the investment of public resources into a particular activity. So you can see here, instead of just saying effective publicity and extension service, down here they can say, well, we're going to develop media ads to appear on TV, radio and newspapers in 2004. For all we know, that's the same activity they were carrying out But now it's going to have a very different effect within the organisation, because now we know what we're aiming for, why we're investing that money, and what sort of change in visits to the national park that we're aiming for. Again, this might feed into the way we gather evidence on this. How might you do that if you're going to try and work out whether this action is effective? What would you do? You're running these large-scale sort of broadcast media program. What research would you do to know that that's having the effect that you want? A survey, yeah. I'd say that you would survey people, either people watching TV, or more efficiently and effectively, you would have staff at the national parks surveying people coming and saying, well, you need to be measuring, is there more than 10% coming? But you wouldn't just measure the numbers, you'd also want to know, well, why are they coming? How did they hear about it? And everyone, we've all been asked those questions before when we, how did you hear about our service? That's part of what they're doing. They're trying to work out if their activities that they've put in place to achieve their objectives are appropriate. Are they doing what they expect, or are people coming for some other reason? Has there been, a troop of orangutans have come through this park? I don't know if orangutans come in troops, but is there some other reason why people are coming there? And you need to be able to know for efficiency of your programs. Okay, I'll leave you to have a look at that. But this is an excerpt from a local plan. So those of you who are not familiar with planning and how it works here in Brisbane, we have a local planning scheme that covers the whole of the local government area. And then under that, we have local plans that are more specific at the suburb level. Again, it's a nested hierarchy, a bit like mission, vision, goals, right down to activities. Except here we've got a regional plan, we've got a planning act, a regional plan, a local plan, a local planning scheme, and then a local plan or a neighbourhood plan under that. But what I encourage you to do is have a look through that, and if you're a planner, the next time you're looking at a planning document, see if you can find measurable SMART objectives within those plans. See if you can find performance criteria. If you look at a planning scheme, you will see it's desired, they used to call them desired environmental outcomes. Then they called them sustainable outcomes. And they sort of fit somewhere between goals and objectives. They're required under Queensland law to have performance criteria attached to them so that you can measure whether you're achieving that. Now, in this situation, though, when you look at that, you can see that, well, it will guide planning decisions for a certain extent, but perhaps it's missing some of the criteria for a SMART objectives. Perhaps those criteria are being held internally. Does anyone know why that might happen? Why don't we see clear, transparent, SMART objectives in some government documents? Encourage you to think strategically. So there's a couple of reasons. Maybe they're internal because they're sensitive. Okay, perhaps it would skew the results from whatever they're managing if all the stakeholders knew exactly what those targets were and within what time. It might change the pressure that lobby groups put on them. In planning, it might also be that it allows a bit more wiggle room with assessment, that it means that they're not locked in, that they can have more of a performance-based approach rather than having a very rigid approach to every site-based decision that they make. In practice, though, what's also mixed in here, whether we're talking about environmental management or planning, is politics as well. So often organisations find it very difficult to set clear and measurable objectives because it implies a certain investment of resources. It implies a certain type of accountability to the investment of those resources, and that may not suit the particular political players that are happening there. Now, as planners and managers, You probably won't be able to control that, but you need to think strategically so that you understand the dynamics that you're working within. But in general, we need to come back to this, and this is sort of a mantra in organisational management. If you don't define a target, how do you know if you've hit it? And if you don't indicate where you're going, how do you know if you got there? As I was saying, it's difficult. It takes time to set these objectives, but more importantly, it implies accountability in resources, decision making, and it can polarise the politics when people say exactly what they're going to do. I'm going to do just one or two more slides before we have a quick break and then talk about decision criteria and multiple criteria analysis. Now, once you set comprehensive goals, particularly at the local government level or in a large department, what you're going to find is that they conflict with each other. They're based on different goals, and perhaps there's different measurements, different criteria involved with that. This leads into our next section on having multiple criteria and what can you do about it. Often goals are ambiguous, that they're not given those objectives, and so what happens is that then they can become quite subjective in action. I would say that because of the political dynamics of large organisations, it also sort of plays into that in terms of subjectivity. It encourages groups to rally together and try to push a particular subjective interpretation of the goals. And often these processes ignore real world trade-offs. So it's about perhaps some of the goals actually need to be up in the vision, that it's sort of a high level, this would be amazing if the world was the way we want it to be, this is where we would be heading. But in practice, we may not have the resources to achieve what we want to achieve, and there's going to be real world trade-offs. So especially with sustainability, and planners have to deal with this all the time, you might have two goals that are worthy goals and you're going to have to trade off against them. Most government documents won't tell you how you're going to do that. They leave it up to specific decision makers. I'll leave you to think about that. Where does applied research fit? And I'll come back to that later on. So I want you to think about how this works, particularly in that scenario I just talked about. And then what I'll get you to do, as we'll have a short break, we'll actually have a 5-minute break and 5 minutes for you to pick one of these and have a go at identifying a goal or objective. So we'll start again in 10 minutes, but I'm assuming at least 5 minutes of that is discussion with the people around you. Let's start with the discussion. Have a go at identifying a goal and an objective. I'll do an environmental management one to go with that. We can say we're going to have a goal and an objective for biodiversity conservation in southeast Queensland, okay? But you can choose any of those four if you prefer, environmental managers. So have a go at identifying a goal and an objective for that, and there's your SMART criteria down the side there. Okay, so either you can have your break and stretch your legs and make sure your blood's still moving, or you can continue talking about that. I do encourage you, though, to see if you can specifically write it down. This is one of these processes where you look at it and you go, how simple, that's so easy to do. It's actually quite difficult to succinctly write down a good objective that sits under a clear goal. So I'll give you a few more minutes for a break or further discussion of that, and then we'll start back again. I'm just going to remove this screen, so if you need to write something, take note of that or take a photo of it.
Hey Bob, about your IT problem, maybe you need to close your browser because one of the web pages are trying to catch some information from our computer.
I bet it's that one.
Yeah, maybe the dominoes, because they ask for position and other things.
Thank you. That's all right.
Just one last question about the kind of file, because one of the questions is like we need to do a hierarchy, but I'm confused about who do the hierarchy is the real hierarchy, or use the whole to do the hierarchy analyze, because it's
The hierarchy chart.
different.
Yeah, either. I'm fine with either. However, if you use the hierarchy chart, just make sure that we can clearly see which categories, well, you can, from the hierarchy chart, you can see where the parent nodes are and where the child nodes are. But I don't mind which one.
So I can use the tree.
Yeah, but yep,
The tree
you can use either.
okay.
Yeah. So we just had a question about Fact 5. I'll feedback to everyone. The question was, do you have to use the hierarchy chart as the task asks you to, or can you use the tree diagram? The answer is you can use either, okay? I'm not going to be really rigid with exactly how you go about communicating some of that information. The main thing is that you communicate it. So similarly, you can, if you wanted to put a diagram together, you can use NVivo to do that. But if you're more familiar with other software, then just use that. Do whatever's fast. Actually, I don't mind if you put in a handwritten diagram if that's going to save time for you. Are there any other questions about Fact 5 while we're here? Excellent. Well, if you think of them as we're going along, you can ask me at the end. Okay, I'm not sure if you actually needed or wanted that break, but no one told me that you didn't. Let me just let me go back to this. Thank you for the IT advice, wherever you are, Ignacio. Okay, now, the reason I want to show you this, I posted it on Facebook. I'm not trying to politicise our course. What I'm trying to do is show you how good research can speak into a polarised decision. And I mentioned this in the public participation course that I'm running. I know some of you are part of that as well. That here we have an example of how public decision makers, planners, managers, whoever they are, can collect data and use it to assist the public in making decisions, okay? Particularly, we're talking about these non-rational environments. How can we help decisions to be a little bit more evidence-based? And I just thought this was a brilliant use of data to do that. So they showed here they collected opinions across Australia, significant sample in each electorate across Australia, federal electorate, of the people that disagreed that we should not change the marriage law in Australia. So they're the people that do want to change it. They're the people that say, I agree, keep it as it is. And then these are people that were neutral, that either were saying, I don't know, or don't bother me right now. Oh no, they must have filled it out, but they were neutral. And then they mapped that across Australia. Now, if you communicated the data like that, what it appears to me is that Southern Australia over here is fairly neutral. Most places are in favour, but Queensland is predominantly against. But what's interesting here is, again, they lead you through some fantastic steps in terms of the data, how they found it, and what it might mean. So it tells you about how that works, that the darker blue are less supportive of change, and the darker orange are more supportive of change. But then they go through some more distinctive, they start with the bird's eye view, and then they get people to look in a bit closer. So they bring you in to Sydney, and they show how in the inner city you have stronger support, and then that drops as you head out from the inner city. And what was interesting is that they were able, I'll just have to flick through some of this detail, you can look at it later if you wish, is that they ended up saying, actually, this is the pattern across Australia. It doesn't matter whether you're in a predominantly, even though this has become politicised, whether you're predominantly Labor or Liberal, the seat that you're in, it's more about how close to the inner city are you. So it sort of helps people to step back from the emotion of it and think a little bit more about, well, what are some of the dynamics going on here? Then they go through it a bit more. So they look at Brisbane as well, and that the same thing's going on. And then they look at it a little bit more and they say, but even Queensland, where it looks like it's completely in favour, completely against any change, that in none of those does that top 50% of the people, because we have that neutral chunk there. So nowhere across Australia is the majority of people in favour of keeping it, definitely keeping it the same. Then the place that I want to leave it on is it's quite interesting that then they say, and so that's what the people think, but one of the most interesting things about it is, it wasn't that, Ignacio. One of the most interesting things about it is that some of the politicians, and they only show one side of this actually, conservative politicians that are against any change, and then they look at what the people in their electorate think. So this is one of the leading opponents of change in this debate. 60% of the people in his seat want to see change. And then I think, does it show it? Tony Abbott, even more extreme. 70 people of the people in his seat want to see change, whereas he's a vocal supporter of keeping it the same. And so what they were able to do, they were able to lead through a step of going, here's the overview, here's what it looks like more closely, here are the actual patterns. It's not politics, it's something else is going on about where you live and the context that you live in, the urban setting that you live in, and how rural your setting is. And then they say, but perhaps the big question that we need to ask ourselves is, are our elected representatives actually representing the people in their seat? Now, I would like to see a balancing of that, and are there any politicians that are for change that are out of step with their seat? They didn't say whether that's the case. Anyway, when I looked at that, I thought, I've got to show this to the research class, because you will find that most planning and management decisions, although they're probably not national, will have a political element to it, because any decision, any program that puts in place any new objective, it implies that you're going to distribute resources differently, and there's going to be people that at least perceive there to be winners and losers, and then there's going to be politics and conflict. You need to come up with creative ways to measure data and to try and at least get some sort of rational frame into that situation. Well, I encourage you to do that. Okay, any comments on all of that? Again, I'm not talking about any particular stances on that. I'm talking about the responsibility of people working in government to be working within the public interest. And so that research is very much a tool to do that when we're talking about decision making. Okay, so I won't get you to share this actually, but if you have questions about setting these goals and objectives, please come up to me afterwards. Just to remind you of the main principles that we went through before, that the goal should not talk about the actual programs and activities that you're going to have. It should be at least 5 years long and perhaps not time specified, probably not time specified. Whereas once you get to the objective, we're wanting to see those smart, those elements of a smart objective in there. Think about how to write performance indicators. Think about how you're operationalising the concepts that are within your goal. Sometimes the goal, you know, it's a nice concrete goal, but often if you're talking about livability, if you're a planner, or if you're talking about biodiversity, if you're talking about environment, these are concepts that you need to operationalise in some way. You may have to do it in a number of ways for complex ones. So even I've got some of those occupational health and safety ones in there because last semester I had some students in OH&S there as well. Safety on a mine site is very topical at the moment in OH&S as well, because we have the emergence of black lung disease again in Queensland, which we haven't seen here for, I think, since the 80s. So there's new objectives that we need to set. Okay, what we're going to do now is talk about, I guess, some of the complexity that sits behind that first section, that we have a range of different decision criteria in play, and that we need to find a way to feed that into a decision-making process. Okay? Again, you may not be managing this process in the next few years, you may later on, but the more you understand about the environment you're working within, the more professional you'll be in your work. Okay, so I want you to just very quickly reflect on this on your own, and then chat to the person next to you. Actually, just do it on your own, looking at time. And I'm going to 4 groups, okay? Your group A, this half of the middle section is group B, this half of the middle section is group C, and your group D over there. I want you to look at that. These are different settings where decisions might be made, and I want you to think about what might be the style of decision making that's going on here. How would it be done? what are some of the challenges in terms of achieving objectives when you're looking at these different settings. Okay, I'll just give you 30 seconds to reflect on your own, see if you can jot something down, and then feel free to jump in as I quickly go through them in 30 seconds. Okay, so as I talk about your particular group, if you want to add something, feel free to stick your hand up as you were just reflecting on that yourself. So these are 4 different settings that you can divide most decision making into these sort of qualities. So in the first one there, we're talking about something that's stable, long lasting. In the second one there, we're talking about something where there's nowhere near as much certainty involved. Down here, we're then talking about a lot more complexity in terms of the decision-making context. And then underneath, you're talking about something that is new and perhaps unknown to a certain extent. So when we're talking about that first one, Group A, here we've got a situation where it's a familiar process, everything is known or given, and you're probably making decisions based on standard operating procedures, okay? In terms of evidence and research, you're hopefully looking at data based on what's happened before with that process. It's being framed by policies, and you're using those to hopefully improve what you're doing as you're going along. But it's very much down at the fine-tuning type of things. Does Group A have anything to add there? Is that kind of along the lines of what you were thinking? You may not have experienced this yet. It can be very nice and cruisy when you have this situation. It can also be very frustrating if the standard operating procedures are not properly based on historical data. So that's something that you would want to be watching out for. Good monitoring and evaluation. In the second one, we're talking about uncertainty. And this is really coming to the fore in planning and management as we look to engage with things like climate change, with things like unexpected global financial change to markets. So especially since 2008, there's been a lot of work done in this area. So here you've got a situation where you don't know clearly what are the causal linkages, cause and effect, and so it's going to make it difficult to map out exactly what the decision's going to be from start to end. Because as you step forward and learn a bit more about the program, you might have more certainty, but the nature of the problem means that it's still uncertain into the future. This is a huge problem for planners or managers that are putting together a plan because here we're trying to map a direction into the future. So how do you do that, and how do you put research in place to assist with decision making? By and large, it's difficult to deal with this situation rationally. You're talking about particular scenarios and assumptions about the future. Perhaps you can narrow down the uncertainty a little bit, but it often leads to a pattern of incremental decision making. Perhaps we don't know what the big decision is, but we know what the next little decision is. So you would want to see decision making that starts to set up like that. You would want to do data analysis and research that is hopefully continuous and bringing in the data and helping to support those incremental decisions. Group B, did you have anything to add there? No? Group C. Group C here, we're dealing with a situation that is complex. So not only is it uncertain, it involves a whole range of stakeholders with different views. This is a classic resource management issue, especially once we're talking at the regional level, which most resource management happens. So again, once we're talking about a resource at the regional level, it can be a little bit abstract in terms of what we're doing, and there are lots of variables connected to other things. We can deal with this a little bit rationally, but only if we reduce it down. It's going to involve a lot of difficult decision making and probably collaborative decision making. You would want your research to assist with those directions, and perhaps your research might be about how do we get those diverse groups working together and establishing some sort of commonality. So a lot of collaborative planning is focused on that sort of decision making and the research that supports that. Sometimes the research is going to be about the process rather than the actual event that you're making decisions about. So often in governance, our research is about, well, how do we improve the governance? It might be too difficult to connect the way we're making decisions with what actually changes in the environment. And so you might have to mostly focus back here on the decision making between actors. And then the final one, where we're talking about a new activity that hasn't been done before, we're talking about something that's primarily risky. If we're talking about investment of resources and trying something new, you're going to be talking here about organisations that are able to deal with that risk. Governments are notorious for not being able to deal with that risk. And so you're going to have to find some sort of proxy for prior experience, some sort of analysis of probability of risk and failure. And so in that situation, you kind of have a drive towards conservatism, because every decision that you make, you're sort of weighing it up and you're probably erring on the side of caution. Unless you can get someone else who's more nimble and their overheads are lower to take on that risk for themselves. Maybe that's what you do. And that's sometimes what government does when they fund a pilot project for an organisation to do. So maybe that's how you try and move forward. In terms of your research, perhaps you carry out a pilot program and start to build that knowledge base around that activity. For a government, we're talking about institutional change when we're talking about a new activity, and we might be talking about 20 years before the government has capacity to really work in that sector. And that's what we're finding across the world in terms of environmental planning and management, that some of the issues that began to rise up in the 80s and 90s, governments are now getting the capacity to deal with internally. Most of these I'll leave you to look through on your own, but basically if you want to polarise it, you can say that organisations tend to either put in strategies to avoid uncertainty, either by ignoring it, or this sort of fits in avoidance, reducing the uncertainty in terms of assuming it will or will not happen. So sometimes you make a decision where you've said, well, we're going to go this way and we're going to assume that climate change isn't real, just say. Unfortunately, a lot of politicians are doing that. But what we're mostly going to be talking about in the next few weeks is non-avoidance strategies. So how might you gather more data, how might you analyse for patterns, etc., and then feed that data into a decision-making process. There's a number of different ways to do that. If there are particular areas that interest you that you want me to find resources on, then let me know. So there's things like Delphi technique that you can do with experts, and then there's a whole range of participatory approaches that you can do with a range of stakeholders. I want to talk very quickly, because this is where planning and management comes from, and in more technical areas, it's where it still is, on the rational comprehensive decision model, where we go through, show of hands, who's heard of this before? Okay, very quickly, it's a step process. It assumes that we're making a rational approach to planning and management and decisions. Okay, so it's saying, well, we can define the problem, which in itself is a large assumption. Can you define the problem? Who's going to define it? And for what purposes? Then you've defined the problem rationally, then you identify the decision criteria, you look at the alternative to solve the problem, you evaluate alternatives, select the best alternative, and then put that into action. That's sort of the decision-making model, and then you're going to need an evaluation model that curves up with that. Okay, there are issues with this approach. However, what we're going to do to move forward is to assume that as a species, we want to live in at least, although we struggle to work rationally, that perhaps rationality doesn't exist except in some very specific examples. We need to bound this situation in some way and have an evidence-based approach to decision-making as much as we can, unless you want to just give in to the politics of the situation. So this is, I guess, some of the complexity sitting behind rational decision-making, assuming a high degree of control when we're talking about a lot of planning and management contexts, real-world contexts. We may not have that control. It assumes abundant resources. More and more, we've got limited resources to make those decisions. And it also is saying that we don't consider inherent cognitive limits on human and organisational rationality, whereas we know that people tend to be bounded in their decision-making. But we're going to assume that we're trying to have a rational approach to things and manage the politics of the situation at the same time. And that's what some of these other decision models come out of. So very much before the 60s in the West, that the rational decision-making model was the way we did things. It was the experts, perhaps scientists, spoke with government and probably industry. They call it the iron triangle to make decisions. From the 60s onward, we talk about some other decision-making models. So one of them, very foundational to planning, was Lindblom, and he talked about incrementalism. So this is where we're making small decisions, the best bounded decision that we can make at that time, and we're going to just change things slightly as we go along, rather than a big overall visionary change to what's going on, a rational change. Then there was another guy, Simon, and he talked about satisficing, and I've already mentioned this idea of bounded rationality, that within our sphere of knowledge, we try to make the best and hopefully evidence-based decision that we can make. But if we sit around trying to argue about the optimal decision, we'll be here forever. That we need to find a decision that is adequate enough for our purposes, perhaps the best that we can see at this time, the most achievable. So that's sort of that decision-making model. And then another foundational planner, Etzioni, came up with this model of mixed scanning, where we might have an overall arching vision that is rational, the goals are rational, but then the way we go about implementing that is very incremental and strategic. And I see this a lot in government, actually. I see environmental planners with all their projects that they want to do, and it fits within the broader rational goals, but they wait for the right time to put it out there. I may attach some more detail on that for people that are interested in learning a bit more about those decision models. You can often use these decision models to analyse a situation, how are decisions being made in this situation, and yeah, I'll leave it at that for now. What I will do, looking at time, is I'll skip through this for now. But basically there's a few slides here, and those of you in the public participation course I think have seen some of these slides already, but once we're talking about public decision making and research and involving a range of stakeholders, we're talking about this complex problem of how do we feed evidence, or to what extent can that range of stakeholders make decisions based on research, based on evidence. And there's this whole argument about, are we giving decisions over to the rule of the mob? so here at the bottom we've got the French Revolution, and I don't want to get into whether you were in favour or not of that sort of approach to change. Or you've got more of this idea of a hive mind, where we talk about a colony of bees or even of ants as almost being like a super organism. They somehow all do their thing and bring it together into a way of functioning. And so there's a couple of slides here, and I'll see if I can put the link on Blackboard as well, for where they've looked at, well, what does it mean to get the criteria, what criteria do we need to tap the wisdom of crowds, i.e. evidence-based decision making, rather than interest-based decision making that refuses to look at evidence. So I'll find that paper and I'll put it up there for you, but you can get some good detail from that. And I might come back to this question in the next lecture. Do you actually think that a wise crowd can make the tough decisions? So when you've got a diversity of stakeholders, can you get stakeholders to make decisions that are against their interests? Okay, that's what this boils down to. If it's a tough decision, they may not get what they want, or at least exactly what they want. So I might come back to that at the start of the next one, which means I better skip this. Now, what we're going to do with the 12 minutes remaining is talk about toilet paper. But only as an example to get you thinking. I don't know if you're like me, but you walk into a supermarket and there's the toilet paper, at least in Western supermarkets, I can't speak for the whole world, and there's this almost like, seems like a whole aisle now in some places. How do you choose which toilet paper you're going to buy? Okay? You can discuss with the person next to you. Get as personal as you're willing to. Okay. I can see some very animated discussions about toilet paper. I can see some serious ones and people Googling different brands of toilet paper. Okay, very quick brainstorm so that we use this as an example. What sort of things could you use to decide which of that huge aisle of toilet paper you're going to select for your purchase? Price. Students often say price straight away. What other things might you say? Softness, yeah. So on some of the labels it's got, this is, all the ads it's got, babies' bottoms and ducklings, etc. So they're trying to pitch the marketing. Anything else? Yeah, will you go scented or unscented? That's a controversial decision in some share houses. Colours, yeah, there's a purple one there. I want to test the colour fastness first. And then some people might look at environment as well, so the sustainability of where are they sourcing that. So you can see even with something as simple as toilet paper, we've got a diversity. Well, students are going to say price, and then you might have a diversity in terms of other criteria under that. And so once we get to a more complex public decision, think about how much larger, more complex that decision criteria is. And so basically what we're thinking about, and I'll have to skip over that, but this is a good one for reflection, to have a look at some real-world examples and then try and think about, well, what are some decision criteria that might sit behind those examples? Okay, how would you evaluate what a good decision is? Okay, So have a reflect on that. There's one there that's particularly at, well, there's an environmental one at the bottom, planning one at the top, and OH&S one in the middle. Okay, and what you might come up with, you'll have some very specific criteria, but you'll probably find this general criteria is what you can fit most, if not all of them, into. You need to think about, with any public decision, is it feasible politically? Again, scientifically, it might be the best one, but if you can't get the politics to match up, you're not going to get anything to happen. How are stakeholders going to react? That's sort of a little bit related. Health and ecological implications, etc. And I've generalised that again into 6. I would say that most of them are fairly straightforward. I'll just say a little bit more about a couple more of them. Okay, so some of these criteria are easier to measure than others. What do we use to measure economic efficiency? Well, usually we've got an established market and a dollar system to go with that. And so in many cases, we can just run with that. Nice, clear, agreed upon. But I'll leave you to think about, what do you do with things that can't be traded in the marketplace? How do you calculate that? Just say we've got some green space and we have to decide, are we going to develop that park or keep it as a park? Okay. How do you need to, if we're developing it, there's a market for that. So we can fit that within the dollar system. We can work out how much it's going to cost to purchase the land, how much it's going to cost to build it, what sort of profit margin we might make at the end, add it all up, and then we can say what the value of that decision might be. There'll be some other variables too. But what about green space? How are we going to do that? We might come back to that one next week as well. Part of this, so that's economic efficiency, is we need to think about distributional equity as well, another general category that we're talking about here. Who wins, who loses? So with the green space example, you're going to have particular players that would win from developing it and particular ones that would lose. And by default, you might have the reverse from the other way around in terms of the opportunity cost. Usually we try and compensate through taxes, so financially we might compensate, and we can use a range of measures to work out, to do research on who do we compensate and how much. But again, there are some things that are difficult to compensate for. For example, what about a hydro dam in Indigenous areas? So you can move those people. We've calculated the hydro dam and all the benefits economically it's going to bring. We're going to move those people and we're going to compensate them. We're going to buy them new land. We might even help them set up farms or give them training. But do you think they'll be happy with that? They should be. We're economic efficiency and we're balancing it. No, they probably won't be. At least a great bulk of them won't. Because what we're dealing here with is another different decision-making criteria that's coming in around social and cultural acceptability. And so we need to think about, is it within the norms? Sometimes those norms are flexible, so over time people will get used to the change, but sometimes they'll be long-lasting and we can never properly compensate for an unacceptable decision in that realm. And so that's where this idea of multi-criteria analysis comes in. May finish, or I think I can make it 4 more minutes. Coming back to that idea of toilet paper, and you've got a range of different criteria, how do you bring those together to make a decision? And so here we can have a range of different decision-making rules, if you like, to do that. I think I've got time to quickly whip through it, and then at the start of the lecture next week, oh sorry, it's not next week, it's in 2 weeks, because there's a break next week, we will look at we'll look at a basic example of this. So it will be a good way to Make sure you haven't forgotten everything over the break. But let me just run through these rules for these 4 minutes. So just say we had this criteria down the left for a particular decision that we're making, a generalised decision, and we're going to say that we're considering biological, economic, social, administrative feasibility and distributional equity, okay? So that's 5 of those 6 I was talking about before. And we have 4 different options for making that decision. Let's look at these 4 under some of these different decision rules, okay? The first one we're going to call the dominance approach, and very simply what we're going to do is measure each of these options, A, B, C and D, and we're going to look at these different criteria, biological through to equity, and we're going to say which one's best, okay? And under the dominance approach, whichever one is best in the most of our criteria is going to win out. In this, I've kept it nice and simple, and you can see here, because number D is best in biological and social, which is 2 criteria, under this decision-making rule, we would select option D, okay? 2 minutes. This is the next one. So here, with the criteria ranking approach, we might say, well, actually, we're going to rank these criteria and in order of importance, and it's really about first past the post. Okay, so and often government decision making might fall into this, and the terms of reference for the multiple criteria analysis will clearly show this. They still want you to measure these other criteria, but basically under a simple ranking approach, once we get one option or an option, in this situation only one of them hits number 1, we would simply select number 1 and select option A and then move on. If we had 2 that achieved that, then we would have to look at what else are they achieving and what rank do those other criteria have in that achieving. I've kept it simple there. But sometimes what we might do is say, no, it's not just first past the post, they're all important. And this often happens in planning and management. But we might say some are more important than others. Okay, so in this situation where I would say it's there's a socially polarised situation in terms of economics and equity and biologically sensitive, so we've weighted those a little heavier. And what we would do then is look at those different criteria, measure them, they're the best, but then we would have to keep that as 1. We would halve this, the administrative one, but we would multiply this by 3, and then likewise with this we would use the weighting to decide it. Now this is generalised, so we're not going into the specifics. We'll do that when we come back. Okay. In reality, we may not have the resources to look through all of those options. So sometimes what we might do is a screening approach for efficiency. We might say that there's a minimum acceptable value on some or all of those criteria that has to be met. And if we don't meet them, then we're throwing those ones out. So using these criteria, where only A and C met the criteria, then we would bring it down to 2 and we would be able to analyse it. So that's sort of an extension of some of those of the earlier weighting approach. Now this is the example that I'll give you when we come back, where we have a national park and there needs to be a decision about which of 4 parcels do you buy in the first year of this project. And you're going to be the analyst and you're going to make that decision. But we will leave it there for this time, and we'll come back with a few of those. So make sure you have a look through those slides and remind yourself in the lead up to the lecture. Remember, Prac 5 is due before I see you again, but I will be watching the Facebook page over the break if you have questions. Email, I'll try to get back to you, but there'll be more of a delay. And then I'll see you again on that first Thursday back in 2 weeks. Okay. Well done. Hope you get some sort of break in the next week. You can sleep in next Thursday, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks.